A quiet hospital hallway suddenly explodes into chaos when a pregnant woman is cornered by her sister-in-law and the mistress, then hit with a brutal kick that sends her crashing to the floor, clutching her stomach in breathless pain. They believe everything has been perfectly staged, that no one saw a thing, that they can bury the truth behind a few cold excuses. But they do not know someone is standing at the far end of the hallway, her father-in-law. A man with enough power, status, and resolve to drag the entire act of violence into the light and make all three of them pay for what they did. What follows is a tense battle between justice and cruelty, with a nationwide manhunt and a courtroom showdown that decides everything. And trust me, you will not see the ending coming until we dive in. Tell us what time you are watching and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. The winter morning at Street Mercy Hospital in Boston carried a cold stillness that felt sharper than the icy wind outside. The fluorescent lights above the waiting area cast a pale glow over the white floors and the long rows of molded plastic chairs. Nurses moved through the hallway with quiet urgency, their shoes clicking softly against the polished tiles. Most patients sat silently, absorbed in their own concerns. Yet none seemed as fragile as the young woman in the middle row. Julia Parker, 30 years old and 7 months pregnant, held her phone in both hands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stared at the ultrasound image displayed on the screen. The outline of her baby seemed to shine brighter than the hospital lights around her. It was the only thing that gave her strength. She breathed in slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. She rested one hand on her stomach, feeling the faint movement inside, the reminder that she was not alone, even when everything in her life felt dangerously unstable. Her marriage to Ethan Ward had deteriorated over the last several months. Arguments that once ended with apologies now ended with doors slamming and long, punishing silences. She felt isolated inside her own home. She had come to the hospital early, hoping to complete her prenatal checkup before Ethan returned from a business meeting. She did not want to deal with another harsh conversation. She wanted only to protect her child. As she lowered her phone and exhaled shakily, a sharp sound echoed down the hallway. High heels, fast, confident, almost aggressive. The rhythm of the steps bounced off the walls and cut through the quiet atmosphere. Julia looked up. 2 women approached from the far end of the corridor. They looked completely out of place in the sterile medical environment. The first was Isabella Ward, Ethan's older sister. She carried herself with the self-assured posture of a corporate executive who expected the world to bow when she entered a room. Her tailored coat fit her perfectly. Her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Her eyes were cold enough to freeze the floor beneath her. Walking beside her was Madison Drew, young, stylish, beautiful, and unmistakably smug. Her long hair fell perfectly over her shoulders. Her expensive dress contrasted starkly with the simple clothing of the hospital staff. She looked like someone who enjoyed the attention that followed her, especially when that attention came at the expense of someone else. Julia's throat tightened. She had not expected them. She had not prepared for this. She instinctively moved her hands to cover her belly. Her pulse quickened with fear. The hallway suddenly felt too small and too bright. Isabella stopped in front of her, tilting her head with a look of disdain. "You still think you belong in the Ward family?" she asked, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Julia swallowed hard. "Please, I am here for a checkup. I do not want trouble." Madison stepped forward with a mocking smile. "The baby will not fix anything. It will not save you. Everyone knows that." Tensure was treacherous. Julia pushed herself up from the chair, wanting only to leave. The tension felt suffocating. "I need to go," she whispered. But Isabella and Madison moved in front of her, blocking her path. The hostility in their faces sent a chill down her spine. Julia took a step back, but Madison reached forward and shoved her shoulder. It was not a hard push, but enough to make Julia lose her balance for a moment. She clutched her stomach, gasping. "Do not pretend you are delicate," Madison sneered. "You are just pathetic." Julia tried to steady her breathing. She looked around for help, but the hallway seemed empty, except for a distant nurse who had not yet noticed the confrontation. She felt trapped. Isabella took a step back, shifted her weight, and in one swift motion, she kicked Julia directly in the ankle with force and precision. Julia cried out as pain shot up her leg. She stumbled, her knees buckled, and she fell hard onto the cold floor. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She curled instinctively around her stomach, terrified for the baby. A thin line of blood appeared on her pants. It spread quickly, staining the fabric. Julia felt her vision blur as panic rushed through her. "My baby, please, help. Someone please help," she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. A young nurse at the far end of the hall finally turned. Her eyes widened as she saw Julia on the floor. She rushed forward and shouted, "Doctor! Emergency? She is pregnant." Madison stepped back, startled. Isabella simply crossed her arms as if nothing had happened. Her expression remained cold and unbothered. At that exact moment, Robert Ward, Ethan's father, turned the corner. He had come to the hospital for a routine appointment of his own. The former police chief, who had served the city for 30 years, immediately froze as he took in the scene. His daughter-in-law was on the ground, clutching her belly, trembling in agony. Blood, fear, chaos, and his own daughter and a stranger standing over her. For a moment, Robert could not breathe. Then, his face twisted with a fury so deep that it shook him. His hands trembled as he reached into his coat for his phone. His voice, usually calm and authoritative, cracked with raw emotion as he dialed emergency services. 911, he said, forcing each word out through clenched teeth. "My daughter-in-law is pregnant, and she has been attacked inside the hospital. We need help immediately." The nurse knelt beside Julia, reassuring her as she called for additional staff. Isabella looked away, suddenly uneasy under Robert's burning glare. Madison stepped back another inch, her confidence fading rapidly. The hallway buzzed with urgency. Footsteps pounded toward them. Nurses and doctors hurried forward with equipment, the air filled with orders and medical instructions. Julia's breathing grew shallow as she held her stomach protectively. Robert moved to her side. His voice softened but shook with fear. "Julia, I am here. You are going to be all right. They are going to take care of you." Julia felt her tears fall onto the floor. She could not speak. She could only hold her belly and pray the little heartbeat inside her remained strong. The hospital lights flickered slightly as chaos settled over the hallway. The morning that began in quiet stillness had transformed into a moment that would change all of their lives forever. The doors of the emergency room swung open as nurses rushed Julia Parker inside. The bright white lights above her seemed to blur into streaks as she struggled to remain conscious. Every breath felt shallow. Her hands clutched her abdomen as if she could hold her baby safely inside through sheer willpower. Her body trembled as she was lifted from the stretcher onto the hospital bed. The monitors around her beeped with rapid urgency. A doctor appeared at her side and immediately began assessing her condition. He placed the fetal monitor on her stomach and watched the screen with practiced intensity. The soft, wavering rhythm of the baby's heartbeat filled the room. It was there, but it was weaker than it should have been. His eyes tightened with concern. Julia tried to lift her head, but exhaustion pulled her back down. The doctor leaned closer. "You need to calm down, Julia. Your stress levels are high. Too much stress can trigger preterm labor." His tone was firm but gentle. He adjusted the monitor again while a nurse wiped the sweat from Julia's forehead. Julia tried to inhale slowly. Her chest rose unevenly. She felt as if her entire world had cracked open. Outside the room, Robert Ward stood with his hands pressed together so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His heart pounded against his ribs. He replayed the scene he had witnessed only minutes earlier, his pregnant daughter-in-law lying on the floor, blood spreading across her pants, Isabella and Madison standing over her. The image burned into his memory with unbearable clarity. He could not stop shaking. He blamed himself. If he had arrived a minute earlier, if he had watched over her more closely during the past months, if he had read the signs of her suffering sooner, the self-reproach clawed at him. He paced back and forth outside the emergency room door, every step filled with worry and guilt. Moments later, the sound of police radios echoed through the hallway. 2 Boston police officers approached with purpose. They had responded to the 911 call that Robert made. One officer nodded respectfully at him. "Sir, We are here to investigate the reported assault." Robert cleared his throat and gestured to the hallway behind him. "It happened right there. Too many people saw it. A pregnant woman was kicked. A hospital security officer joined them. He held a clipboard and looked tense. We reviewed the footage. The cameras captured everything. It is preserved and ready for the police." Inside the emergency room, Julia blinked slowly as she opened her eyes. The harsh light above her made her squint. She felt as if she were floating between consciousness and sleep. Her breathing steadied slightly as she realized she was no longer on the cold hallway floor. The room was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping around her. She looked to her left and saw the translucent curtain that separated her from the rest of the emergency wing. She felt small, fragile, lost, but she also felt something else: shame. She did not want anyone to think she was causing trouble. Even now, her instinct was to protect her husband's family, to avoid confrontation, to pretend things were not as terrible as they seemed. But the pain in her body and the faint heartbeat of her unborn child reminded her that pretending had a cost. Robert entered the room slowly. He approached her bedside and sat beside her, his voice low and warm. "You are not alone, Julia. I will not let anything happen to you or the baby." His words broke the last piece of strength she had been holding together. Tears spilled from her eyes as she covered her face with shaking hands. No one had spoken to her like that in months. No one had stood on her side. No one had looked at her with genuine concern. She cried with the rawness of someone who had been holding everything inside for far too long. A police officer stepped forward. He approached the bed quietly and asked, "Ma'am, we would like to ask you a few questions about what happened, if you feel well enough." His tone was soft and respectful. Julia nodded weakly. She wiped her tears and tried to focus on his words. He asked about the events in the hallway and the physical contact she experienced. She answered in short, trembling sentences. She confirmed the kick. She confirmed the fall. She confirmed the blood. Her voice wavered every time she mentioned her baby. As the officer finished the basic questions, Julia's eyes drifted toward the door. A wave of dread washed over her. "Ethan is going to be angry," she whispered. The fear in her voice was unmistakable. She could imagine his expression, his tone, his accusations. The thought made her stomach twist. Robert reached out and squeezed her hand. "You focus on getting better. I will take care of everything else. I promise you that." A young nurse entered and adjusted Julia's the. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke quietly. "The security cameras recorded the entire incident. The footage is clear. You do not need to be afraid of being blamed." Julia closed her eyes. Her mind drifted to memories she wished she could forget. Times when she had been belittled, times when she had tried to speak but was silenced, times she had cried alone without anyone noticing. The events of that morning were not an isolated moment. They were part of a pattern she had ignored because she believed love meant loyalty at any cost. But this time was different. Her baby's life was at risk. The realization hit her with crushing force. She felt her chest tighten. She whispered, barely audible, "Everything is falling apart." The truth tasted bitter on her tongue. She could not deny it anymore. She remembered the cruelty she had suffered, the cold stares, the cutting remarks, the sense that she no longer belonged anywhere. But as she lay there, listening to the steady beep of the fetal monitor, she felt something shift inside her. This was not just about her. The tiny life she carried depended on her strength. She could not hide behind fear any longer. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered a single sentence that came from the deepest place within her heart. "You must live. You must survive. I will protect you." Her fingers curled weakly against her stomach as she made that silent vow. The shadows of the pain she had endured still surrounded her. But a faint spark of determination flickered to life. Something had changed, and there was no going back. The soft beeping of the fetal monitor filled the recovery room as Julia Parker rested against the raised hospital bed. Her body still ached from the fall, and her mind flickered between fear and exhaustion. She tried to breathe slowly, but every inhale felt heavier than the last. The door clicked open. She lifted her eyes, hoping for a nurse or a kind face. Instead, she saw her husband. Ethan Ward stepped into the room wearing a tailored navy suit that looked more suited for a boardroom than a hospital. His tie was perfect, his shoes were polished, his expression was unreadable. He moved forward with a slow, calculated confidence that made Julia's stomach tighten. He stopped at the foot of the bed. "How are you feeling?" he asked. The question sounded polite, but there was a distance in his voice. He did not touch her. He did not reach for her hand. He did not even move closer. Julia swallowed, fighting the dryness in her throat. "Why did Isabella and Madison do that to me?" she asked. Her voice trembled with confusion and hurt. She needed an answer. She needed her husband to defend her. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "It was a misunderstanding," he said. "You should not make this bigger than it is." Julia stared at him, stunned. "A misunderstanding? I was kicked. I fell. There was blood. Our baby was at risk." He looked away for a moment as if her words were inconvenient. "You cannot file charges," he said. "This situation will damage the family's reputation. My mother is already stressed, and the press watches everything our family does." Hurt filled Julia's chest like ice. "You are worried about reputation while I almost lost our child?" Ethan did not answer. Instead, a faint vibration came from his pocket. He took out his phone and glanced at the screen before sliding it back. But in that brief second, Julia caught sight of a message preview. "Madison. She better keep her mouth shut." Julia's breath froze. The words burned into her mind. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes wide with disbelief. "She texted you that. Why is she telling you what I should do?" Ethan's calm facade cracked for the first time. A shadow of irritation passed over his face. "It is not what you think. Do not start imagining things. Madison was only reacting to a stressful moment. Thank you for watching." Julia felt her heart sink deeper than at any moment in her marriage. She whispered, "You are taking their side." Ethan stepped closer, but the movement felt more like pressure than comfort. "Julia, you cannot blow this out of proportion. Everything we built depends on how we handle public perception." The words stabbed her. Everything we built. It sounded like she was an accessory to his image, not a partner in his life. He exhaled sharply. "Please, do not make this worse. Not now." Quote, "For the family," he added, almost pleading. But to Julia, the phrase felt like a heavy chain tightening around her chest. What family? The one that let his sister attack her. The one that allowed Madison to stand over her while she bled. The one that did not care if her baby lived or died. Before she could respond, the door opened again. 2 police officers entered the room. Ethan straightened his suit jacket immediately, as if preparing to deliver a speech rather than answer questions about an assault. "Mr. Ward," the lead officer said, "we need to ask a few questions regarding the incident in the hallway." Ethan nodded, but he forced a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Of course, officer. I am happy to cooperate." They asked him to recount what happened. He did not hesitate. "Julia slipped," he said. "The floor was probably wet. She has been under a lot of stress lately, so she may have lost balance." Julia's head snapped toward him. "I did not slip," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I was kicked. You saw the bruise forming." Ethan avoided eye contact. "You must be confused," he said quietly. "Falls can feel more dramatic than they are." The officers exchanged a look. Julia stared at her husband, her heart breaking piece by piece. The man standing in front of her was no longer the person she thought she had married. His words were cold, his lies were deliberate, and his loyalty was not hers. A movement outside the door drew attention. Through the small window, Julia saw Madison walking slowly down the hallway. She had her phone in hand and a smirk on her face. She paused long enough to glance inside the room. The satisfaction in her expression made Julia's blood run cold. A moment later, Isabella stepped into view. She wore dark sunglasses even though the hallway lights were bright. She pushed them down the bridge of her nose, offering Julia a look of pure indifference. There was no shame, no guilt, no remorse. Something inside Julia broke. Robert Ward, who had been standing quietly in the corner of the room, suddenly rose to his feet. His voice thundered through the space. "Enough!" His hand slapped the small table next to him, startling everyone. The officers turned toward him. Julia jumped slightly. Ethan stiffened. Robert pointed toward Ethan. Anger trembled in his voice. He saw the message. He heard what happened. She did not slip. My daughter-in-law was attacked. And you, he added, glaring at Ethan, are lying to protect them. Ethan's face reddened. Dad, you do not understand the full situation. Robert stepped closer. I understand perfectly, and the police need the truth. He turned to the officers. I want them to collect the message from his phone. It is evidence. Madison threatened her. The officers nodded and wrote notes. Ethan clenched his jaw. His eyes darkened. He leaned toward Julia. Come home, he said. Let us settle this quietly. Julia looked at him with a steadiness she had not felt before. Silence fell between them. No tears, no fear, only clarity. She saw him for who he truly was. She did not answer. She did not nod. She did not reach for him. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. And in that silence, her disappointment hardened into something stronger. Determination. The afternoon light filtered softly through the blinds of the private recovery room as Robert Ward guided Julia Parker inside. The nurses had made sure the room was quiet and isolated from the main hallway. Robert closed the door behind them and checked the lock twice. His hands still trembled from what he had witnessed earlier, but his voice stayed steady for Julia's sake. You are safe here, he said gently. No one will come near you. Julia lowered herself carefully onto the hospital bed. She was still pale from shock, and her breathing came in shallow bursts. Her hands moved instinctively to her stomach, protecting the small life growing inside her. She whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was small, but it carried every ounce of fear she felt. Robert reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. I am calling someone who can help us. He dialed a familiar number. Within seconds, a firm voice answered. Robert, what is wrong? He exhaled slowly. Sandra, I need you at Street Mercy Hospital. It is serious. Sandra Miles, a 60-year-old attorney with decades of courtroom experience, arrived as quickly as traffic allowed. She walked into the room with calm authority. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, and her sharp eyes scanned every detail as she approached Julia. She shook Robert's hand with the grip of someone who had faced war zones and courtrooms with equal courage. She had, in fact, served alongside Robert during their military years, and their bond had never faded. Sandra reviewed the hospital report first, flipping through the pages with practiced efficiency. Then Robert handed her the security footage that the officers had copied onto a tablet. She watched the scene unfold, the confrontation, the shove, the kick, Julia crashing onto the floor, the blood, Madison's smirk, Isabella standing unmoved. Sandra's expression hardened. She set the tablet down and looked at Julia with deep seriousness. This is not only domestic violence. This is a crime. A violent crime committed against a pregnant woman. Do you understand that? Julia felt her throat close. She covered her face, and tears slid through her fingers. It was the first time someone had said it plainly. The first time someone had called it what it truly was. Sandra moved closer and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You have been carrying this pain alone for too long. You are not alone anymore. Robert stood beside the bed. His voice was thick but steady. I promise you, I will protect you and the baby with everything I have. Before Julia could respond, an officer knocked and entered the room. He held a clipboard. Miss Parker, we need you to write an official statement about the attack, if you feel well enough. Julia's hands trembled as the officer handed her a pen. The paper looked impossibly bright under the room's lighting. She inhaled deeply and forced her fingers to stop shaking. For a moment, she hesitated, but Robert stepped closer. You can do this, he said softly. Julia nodded and began writing. The memory of the kick, the fear, the blood, all returned with painful clarity. Her tears fell onto the page, but she kept writing until she finished. She handed the document back with a trembling breath. Soon after, the head nurse entered the room, holding a chart. I want to update you, she said kindly. The baby has experienced some stress from the impact, but the heartbeat is stable now. The trauma did cause some shock to your system, but you are getting stronger. Julia pressed a hand to her chest. Relief washed over her in slow, warm waves. Sandra moved closer again. "Julia, I strongly advise you to separate yourself from Ethan for the time being. Your safety and the safety of your child are at risk." Julia froze. The idea of leaving her husband felt overwhelming. "He will be angry," she whispered. Robert stepped in immediately. "You are coming with me to the family farm. It is quiet, secure, private. You will be protected at all times." His tone left no room for argument. "You will not go back to that house." Julia's eyes filled with fear. "What if they come after me? What if Ethan tries to find me?" Sandra answered calmly. "You will have a protective order. They cannot come near you without facing criminal charges. You will be legally shielded." Robert nodded in agreement. "They crossed a line. They hurt a pregnant woman. The law is on your side now." Julia looked from Sandra to Robert. For the first time since the attack, she felt something she thought she had lost. Hope. It was small, fragile, but it glimmered in the corners of her vision like a distant sunrise. Robert wasted no time. He walked to the small desk in the room and uploaded the hospital's video footage to the official legal database used by law enforcement. He submitted a full report with timestamps, witness accounts, and the emergency medical findings. Minutes later, several officers and detectives reviewed the footage in the hallway. Their faces tightened with outrage. One detective muttered, "This is unbelievable. They did this in a hospital." Sandra stood nearby, watching with arms crossed. "Make sure this footage is preserved," she told them. "There will be no chance for tampering." Once the officers confirmed that everything was saved, Sandra turned back to Julia. "From this moment on, I will begin gathering every financial document associated with the Ward family. I will review their assets, their communications, and anything else that might help your case." Julia nodded, though her voice trembled. "Thank you." "Well." As Sandra prepared to leave the room, Julia's phone buzzed softly. It was her older brother. When she answered, his voice broke immediately. "Julia, I heard. Are you all right? I am so sorry. I should have been there." Julia pressed the phone to her ear. Tears filled her eyes again. "I am safe now," she whispered. "Robert and Sandra are helping me." Robert watched her with compassion. He understood the weight of her pain. He understood the loneliness she had lived in. He stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. Julia rested her hand on her belly. Her voice was soft but filled with new resolve. "My baby deserves a better life than this." In that moment, she knew the truth. She would fight. For herself, for her child, for the future she had nearly lost. The morning after Julia had been moved to the private recovery room, Sandra Miles sat at a small table with her laptop open. Her fingers typed with steady precision as she accessed public records, financial databases, and legal archives. She had handled hundreds of difficult cases across decades of work, but the Ward family's situation required a higher level of attention. Sandra narrowed her eyes at the numbers appearing on her screen. "Ethan Ward has been moving money," she muttered. Robert Ward stood behind her, arms crossed tightly. "What do you mean?" Sandra pointed to a row of transactions. "There are repeated transfers between Ethan and Madison Drew. They are spaced out to avoid detection, small enough to look harmless, consistent enough to reveal intent." Robert leaned closer, anger rising in his chest. "He has been paying her." Sandra nodded. "And more than that." She clicked another file. "Madison lives in a luxury apartment downtown. The lease is in Ethan's name. He covers every bill, utilities, parking, maintenance. It is all him." Robert's jaw locked. Betrayal pulsed through him, and Julia knew nothing. Sandra shook her head. He made sure she would not. She continued searching until she found a series of documents that made her sit back in disbelief. He lied on his financial disclosure forms. He hid assets when preparing the paperwork after their wedding. That is fraud. Robert felt his hands curl into fists. He lied to her about everything. Sandra kept working. "There is more. Isabella has been using the family charity fund for personal purchases, vacation trips, jewelry, designer clothing, all written off as charity expenses." She breathed out in frustration. "This entire family thinks they are untouchable." Julia walked into the room slowly, holding her belly as she sat down on the nearby chair. She had heard part of the conversation and asked softly, What is happening? 205. Sandra turned her laptop toward her. Julia, you need to see this. She opened an email file taken from the ward corporate server. The subject line was simple, but the message inside made Julia's heart freeze. Ethan had written, "Julia will not be a problem anymore." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She pressed her hand to her stomach, as if shielding her baby from the cruelty of those words. "He said that about me," she whispered. "Why would he say that?" Robert knelt beside her and placed a steady hand on her arm. "Because he was planning to leave you," he said quietly, "and he wanted to make sure the breakup did not affect his reputation." Sandra opened another document. It showed Ethan's private notes, outlining his intention to file for divorce after the baby was born. "He was preparing to walk away," she said. "He just needed the timing to suit him. He needed you quiet until the child arrived. Then he would discard you." Julia felt something inside her crack. A pain, deeper than physical injury, spread slowly across her chest. The betrayal felt like a cut that would not stop bleeding. "I meant nothing to him," she whispered. Sandra placed a hand over Julia's. "Now you see their real faces. You see the truth they tried to hide." Julia wiped her tears and looked up. So, the attack was not random. "No," Sandra answered. "That was not an outburst. That was a plan to break you, to intimidate you, to push you aside." Robert shook with fury. "I want to confront them. I want to look them in the eyes and make them answer for this." Sandra raised her hand firmly. "No, you cannot. Not yet. If you do anything outside the law, they will twist the story and use it against Julia." She fixed her gaze on him. "We will do this correctly. Every step must be legal." Robert forced himself to take a breath. "Fine. But they will not escape this." "Its support." Sandra nodded and motioned for the officers outside the room. "We need additional witness reports," she told them. "Anyone who saw the hallway incident must give a statement." Within the hour, police officers began interviewing the hospital staff and patients who had been present that morning. A middle-aged man in a hospital gown stood with trembling hands as he confirmed that he saw Isabella kick Julia. "The kick was deliberate," he said. "There was nothing accidental about it." In a cupboard, several nurses provided similar accounts. The evidence grew stronger with every statement. In another part of the hospital, Madison Drew had approached the Ward family's attorney and tried to ask a subtle question. "Is it possible to erase camera footage?" she whispered. The lawyer stared at her in disbelief. "Absolutely not. Attempting to delete evidence would be a crime. Do not even mention that again." Madison backed away with a pale face, realizing she had exposed her fear. Back in the recovery room, Sandra updated Robert and Julia. "The Ward family is starting to panic," she said. "They know their actions cannot stay hidden much longer." Robert exhaled slowly. "Good. Let them panic." Sandra nodded. "Local media has heard rumors. They have not published anything yet, but questions are spreading. The truth is coming out." Julia looked at her trembling hands. She felt the weight of everything pressing on her shoulders. The lies, the betrayal, the discovery that she had never been part of the family she thought she had joined. But beneath the sadness, something stronger began to rise. "I have nothing left to lose," Julia whispered. "He took everything from me already." Sandra studied her face. "Then, this is your turning point." Julia's eyes focused, steady and fierce. "I will fight, not just for me, for my baby. They will not control my life anymore." The resolve in her voice filled the room with a new energy. Robert placed a hand on her shoulder. "We are with you, every step." Julia nodded, feeling the first spark of strength in a long time. The darkness of the past days had shown her the depths of cruelty. Now she understood what she was facing. Now she knew what she had to do, and she would fight until the very end. The afternoon air in Sandra Miles's law office felt unusually heavy as she prepared a new stack of paperwork. Julia Parker sat in a chair nearby, her hands resting protectively on her belly while she watched Sandra with a mix of trust and nervousness. Robert Ward stood near the window, arms crossed as he reviewed every step of the plan. Sandra slid a thick file across her desk. "It is time," she said. "I am filing the restraining order." Julia inhaled sharply. The words felt final, necessary, terrifying. Robert gave her a reassuring nod. "This will keep Ethan away from you. It is the protection you and the baby need." Sandra stepped out to submit the documents to the clerk's office. It took less than an hour for the court to issue temporary restrictions, and when she returned, she handed Julia a copy. "You are legally shielded now. If he tries to contact you or come near you, he will face criminal consequences." But Ethan Ward did not accept boundaries. Within minutes of learning about the restraining order, he called Julia's phone. Again and again. His name flashed on the screen. Julia hesitated, but fear kept her from answering. The next call was a voicemail. Julia pressed play, and Ethan's voice boomed with barely contained rage. "I cannot believe you did this. You think you can make a fool out of me. You think you can destroy my life. If you push me, Julia, you will regret it." Her hands trembled as she ended the message. Robert's face hardened. "Give me the phone." She handed it to him, and he immediately began recording every new voicemail and call. "These threats will be evidence. Let him speak. He is digging his own grave." As the day continued, the story began circulating through local media. A reporter from Channel 9 News contacted Sandra's office, requesting details about the assault at Street Mercy Hospital. At first, Sandra declined to speak, but she noticed pressure rising online. Journalists were investigating the Ward family. Hashtags were trending. People wanted answers. Meanwhile, Madison Drew was spiraling. She had never faced public scrutiny before. Her co-workers found her name listed in early news reports, and the story spread quickly. She paced back and forth in her apartment. Her voice shook as she called a friend. "If they expose me, I will lose everything. My job, my reputation, my future." But fear did not stop Isabella Ward. She met with a high-priced attorney who specialized in aggressive defense tactics. Isabella leaned back in the leather chair as she spoke. "I want you to go after Julia. Destroy her claims. Make it look like she planned this." The attorney nodded slowly. "We can argue that the camera angle does not show the full picture." Sandra expected this. When she heard that Ethan's legal team intended to dispute the footage, she immediately drafted a request. "We need the original file," she told the clerk. "Not a copy, not a clip, the original server recording." While Sandra built her case, Ethan attempted something far more reckless. He accessed the company server from his office and tried to delete the video backup that showed Isabella kicking Julia. He navigated to the hospital records folder. His fingers hovered over the delete button. He clicked it, but the system logged every action. The attempt triggered a cyber alert. A digital trail formed instantly. By the next morning, the FBI had contacted the hospital. The agency reviewed Ethan's activity and classified it as intentional evidence tampering. 2 special agents visited the Ward corporate building. Their presence caused chaos among the staff. Madison heard the news and panicked. She fled the hospital parking lot with her purse shaking in her hands. "I cannot stay here," she whispered to herself. "The police will come for me next." And another 10. Later that afternoon, Isabella called Ethan in a fury. Julia overheard none of it, but Sandra relayed the content. Isabella had screamed into the phone. "Julia is tearing apart our family. If she continues this, everything your father built will collapse." But something unexpected happened. Public support shifted. Instead of siding with Ethan or Isabella, the community rallied behind Julia. Comments flooded news sites. People demanded justice for the pregnant woman who had been attacked. Women who had survived domestic violence shared their own stories. Sandra knew momentum was building, but Robert felt something deeper. He felt responsibility. He requested a meeting with Channel 9 News. When the cameras turned on, Robert spoke slowly and firmly. "Violence against a pregnant woman is unacceptable. My daughter-in-law deserves justice. Anyone who harms her harms an innocent child." The interview aired that evening. It spread quickly through social media and gathered tens of thousands of views. Ethan watched it from his office with growing fear. His carefully crafted public image was crumbling. Sandra saw that fear and pressed forward. She expanded the case file, opening new folders filled with timelines, screenshots, financial statements, and recordings. In her office, she connected her laptop to a large monitor. The footage played on the screen. The kick, the fall, the blood, Isabella's cold stare. Madison stepping backward with a smirk. That same evening, the hospital's digital team successfully restored the unedited master recording. They confirmed its authenticity and prepared it for official release to investigators. As Julia sat quietly in the recovery room at the farm, 2 officers from the State Tactical Division arrived to collect Sandra's new evidence. They signed paperwork, loaded the files into secure containers, and gave Julia a nod of respect before leaving. The case had moved far beyond local jurisdiction now. Julia placed her hands on her belly and felt something gentle. The baby's heartbeat was stronger. The faint tapping was steady and reassuring. The monitor beside her confirmed the stability. She closed her eyes, relief softening her expression. She whispered softly, "My love, I will protect you." Her voice carried both tenderness and resolve. The silent war had begun, and she would not back down. Julia Parker woke early on a cool morning at the Ward family farm, feeling a strange new strength in her muscles and in her spirit. For days she had rested, healed, and breathed through the fear that had once controlled her. But now, as sunlight broke through the barn window and spilled across the wooden floor, she realized she was no longer the fragile woman who had been kicked in a hospital hallway. She had survived. More than that, she had awakened. Her baby moved gently under her palm, and she whispered, "We are still here." Sandra Miles arrived shortly after breakfast, carrying a briefcase filled with notes and a laptop under her arm. She placed everything on the dining table and motioned for Julia to sit. "Today we start preparing you," Sandra said. "You will be speaking to prosecutors, reporters, and maybe even the court. You need to know how to hold your ground." Julia listened carefully while Sandra taught her how to stay calm under pressure, how to breathe evenly, how to answer tough questions with clarity and confidence, how to keep her voice steady even when describing painful memories. Later that day, Julia sat across from a reporter who had traveled from New York after hearing about the case. The journalist pressed the record button and leaned forward. "Can you tell us what happened?" Julia did not flinch. She described the attack. The fear, the blood. She spoke slowly, her hands folded over her belly, her voice gentle but unbroken. Her courage captivated the camera. Her honesty reached thousands. Within 24 hours, Americans across the country began expressing their support. Online forums, social media pages, and radio programs discussed the story of the pregnant teacher who had been assaulted by her own in-laws. Women who had survived similar trauma wrote messages of solidarity. Men condemned the violence and demanded justice. Churches, parenting groups, and community leaders offered prayers and encouragement. The nation was moved by her resilience. Ethan Ward watched one of the broadcasts from his office. When Julia appeared on the screen, calm, brave, and dignified, something inside him snapped, his face twisted with frustration. "She is ruining everything," he hissed. He slammed his fist against the desk, sending a stack of papers flying. The rage rising in him was uncontrollable. He paced the room, muttering under his breath, furious that Julia refused to remain silent. Meanwhile, Isabella Ward lost her composure in front of her staff at the charity office. A volunteer dropped a stack of folders, and Isabella exploded. "Do you know what I am dealing with?" she shouted. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family name?" She ignored the frightened expressions around her and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Across the city, Madison Drew sat in her apartment, staring blankly at her reflection. She looked exhausted, pale, lost. She wondered if she should cooperate with the police to save herself. The idea of striking a deal haunted her. She chewed her lip nervously and whispered, "Maybe I should talk to them. Maybe it is the only way out." 18 Place. Back at the farm, Julia organized her prenatal documents on the dining table. Ultrasounds, medical notes, hospital reports. She smoothed each page carefully. Arranging them felt like reclaiming a part of her life. It was not just paperwork. It was a declaration that her child would be protected no matter what happened next. Robert Ward entered the room quietly, holding a notebook filled with bullet points. "I am preparing a statement," he said as he sat across from her. "People deserve to know the truth, and I will not let anyone twist the story." His voice carried the steady conviction of a man who had spent a lifetime defending others. He looked at Julia with warmth. "You are not alone." Julia absorbed every word. Something shifted inside her. She started to believe she was no longer a victim. She was becoming the defender, the protector, the one who would stand between her baby and the world's cruelty. "Maybe I am stronger than I thought," she said quietly. Later that night, she sat at the desk in her room and wrote a letter addressed to her unborn child. "I want you to grow up knowing courage," she wrote. "I want you to know that your mother fought for you, that love is stronger than fear." Her tears fell gently onto the page, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of resolve. Lawyer Sandra reviewed the evidence once again and prepared the files for the courtroom. She examined screenshots, transaction logs, emails, and the restored hospital footage. "We are ready to release this to the public record," she told Robert. "Everything will be exposed soon." The hospital security team played the video again, frame by frame. It revealed the full truth: the kick, Julia's fall, the shock on her face, and the unmistakable moment when Madison smirked in satisfaction. That small, cruel smile changed everything. It proved intent. It captured the heartlessness that no lawyer could deny. Detectives continued searching for the third witness, and by midday they found him. A quiet man who had been waiting for an MRI appointment. When he finally answered the phone, he confirmed what they needed. "I saw the kick," he said. "I saw everything." His testimony solidified the case. Julia stood near the window, watching the clouds drift across the sky. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered, "You deserve to see a mother who fights." It was the first time she fully accepted her new purpose. The fear that once held her down had faded. In its place burned a fierce determination. Reporters began using the same headline across multiple networks: "The Ward Scandal." Julia's story became the center of national attention. Commentators analyzed the evidence. Advocates for pregnant women spoke on her behalf. The narrative shifted quickly away from the Ward family's influence and toward Julia's bravery. Ethan tried desperately to control public opinion. He hired a media consultant. He attempted to issue statements denying wrongdoing. None of it worked. Every attempt backfired. Every denial looked like a lie. His credibility crumbled by the hour. Julia no longer trembled when facing cameras or questions. When a journalist asked how she felt about the Ward family, she looked directly into the camera and said with calm certainty, "I do not belong to that family anymore." The clip went viral. Across the city, Ethan Ward watched it in complete silence. His eyes widened, his breath caught. For the first time since the scandal began, he did not speak. He did not rage. He did not strike out. He simply stood there, frozen. The wind outside Ethan Ward's Boston townhouse rattled the windows as midnight approached, but the chill in the air was nothing compared to the fear gripping the three people inside. Ethan paced back and forth through the living room with frantic energy. His phone screen glowed with a message from a private source inside the police department. The words were clear: "You will all be summoned for questioning at 9 in the morning." His face went pale. He threw the phone against the sofa cushions and shouted, "If we stay here, we are done." Madison Drew flinched at the sound of his voice. She had been sitting at the dining table, clutching her purse like a shield. Her hands trembled so badly that her rings clicked together. "What do we do?" she whispered. Her voice cracked. She felt cornered. She felt doomed. Isabella Ward stood near the window, staring out at the dark street below. She pressed a hand against her forehead. Her heart pounded in her chest. "They are not just calling us in for questions," she said quietly. "They are coming after us." She closed the curtains sharply. "We need to leave tonight. We cannot wait until morning." Ethan rushed to his laptop and opened a flight booking website. His fingers moved so fast, they shook. "Mexico," he said. "A one-way flight. First thing in the morning. We will stay there until things calm down. When the press forgets. When the police stop digging." Interstate. Madison felt her breath shorten as she checked her bag for her passport. Her palms were wet with sweat. She dropped the passport twice before gripping it tightly. "Are you sure we will make it?" she asked. "They will be watching. They will be waiting." "There is no choice," Ethan snapped. "We go now. Grab everything you need, only essentials." They moved like frantic shadows across the house. Suitcases were dragged across hardwood floors, zippers opened and closed. Clothes were stuffed in without folding. Madison nearly tripped over her own shoes while running up the stairs. Isabella lifted a heavy suitcase and cursed under her breath. It was the first time she had ever packed in fear. She had always been the one in control. Now she was running for her freedom. They left lights on everywhere as they darted from room to room. No one bothered to turn anything off. The house looked abandoned and chaotic. Isabella grabbed a pair of sunglasses and put them on. Even though it was still night, she could not shake the feeling that someone was watching from every window, every doorway, every inch of darkness. Madison clutched her plane ticket as they headed out the back door. The night air hit her face like ice. She stumbled, dropping the ticket onto the ground. She scrambled to pick it up with shaking fingers. Ethan grabbed her arm roughly and hissed, "Get it together. We do not have time." Isa bowed to the toile. They reached the taxi Ethan had arranged. The driver looked confused by their panic, but said nothing. He loaded their suitcases and pulled away quickly. Inside the car, no one spoke. The only sound was Madison's shaky breathing and the soft hum of the tires on the road. Every passing police car made them jump. Every intersection felt like a trap. Meanwhile, a convoy of police vehicles approached the Ward residence from the opposite side of the neighborhood. Officers stepped out with warrants in hand. They expected to find 3 suspects asleep or unaware. They surrounded the house. They pounded on the door. When no one answered, they forced it open. Flashlights swept across empty rooms, suitcases missing, clothes thrown everywhere, signs of panic. The officers exchanged grim looks. "They ran," one said. The commanding officer grabbed his radio. "We need an immediate alert. They have fled. Begin the nationwide bulletin. If you tell us." Within minutes, news stations across America displayed the same message. "Wanted for questioning in assault on pregnant woman. Do not approach." Photographs of Ethan, Isabella, and Madison appeared on every major network. Social media exploded with updates. Airports tightened security. Bus stations were monitored. Highway patrol officers were put on standby. At Logan International Airport, the 3 fugitives tried to blend into the early morning crowd. They wore hats and sunglasses, but their behavior gave them away. Isabella looked rigid and stiff. Ethan kept glancing over his shoulder. Madison's legs shook so much she could barely step forward. At the check-in counter, the airline employee typed their names. Her smile faded when 3 red alerts flashed on her screen. Her eyes shifted cautiously toward the security officers positioned nearby. She nodded subtly. The officers responded immediately. The airport erupted into chaos when police formed a perimeter around them. Ethan tried to back away, but an officer lunged forward and grabbed his arm. Another officer fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed through the terminal. Travelers screamed and scattered. Suitcases toppled over. A child cried. Madison fell to her knees and begged, "Please, please, do not arrest me." Isabella was shoved face down onto the cold floor as her sunglasses slid away. Handcuffs clicked shut. Ethan's face slammed against the wall as officers pinned his arms behind him. He grunted in pain. Madison sobbed uncontrollably as they dragged her to her feet. Isabella tried to protest, but an officer silenced her with a sharp command. They were hauled into separate vehicles and driven to the precinct. There, the questioning began. Hours passed. The harsh fluorescent lights exposed every lie, every excuse, every act of cruelty they tried to deny. They grew exhausted from the interrogation. Their voices faded. Their confidence collapsed. Later that night, they were transferred to holding cells, where other detainees watched them with cold, disapproving eyes. Word had already spread. Everyone knew who they were. Everyone knew what they had done to a pregnant woman. When Ethan entered the cell block, a group of inmates stepped forward. "So you are the one who hit a pregnant lady," one man growled. Ethan tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The inmates pushed him against the bars and punched him in the ribs. He gasped for air, gripping his stomach as pain shot through him. Isabella screeched when another inmate pulled her hair. Madison curled into a corner, shielding her face. By the end of the night, all three villains sat bruised, trembling, and humiliated. Their escape had failed, their power had vanished, their arrogance had shattered. Ethan pressed a hand to his swollen jaw and whispered to himself in agony, "It is over. Everything is over." The morning of the first hearing arrived with an unusual heaviness in the air outside the Boston Superior Court. Police officers stood shoulder to shoulder at the courthouse steps, forming a secure perimeter as reporters crowded behind metal barricades. Their camera lights flickered like restless stars, and every microphone was pointed toward the entrance. The public pressure on the justice system was intense. This was not an ordinary trial. This was the case everyone in the nation was waiting to see unfold. Julia Parker stepped out of the car slowly, with her hand resting protectively over her 7-month pregnant belly. Her posture was steady. Her eyes were clear. She wore a simple navy maternity dress that emphasized her strength rather than her fear. Robert Ward walked beside her, acting as a silent shield, while Sandra Miles held a thick folder of evidence in one hand. The click of cameras erupted the moment they approached the courthouse entrance. "Julia, are you ready for today?" one reporter called out. Julia did not respond, but the determination in her expression answered for her. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere shifted from chaos to tense silence. Court officers moved about quickly, preparing for one of the most anticipated hearings in recent memory. Moments later, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed as the defendants were escorted in from the holding area. Ethan Ward, once polished and arrogant, now appeared bruised and swollen from the beating he received in jail. His suit hung awkwardly on his frame, and his eyes darted nervously across the room. Isabella followed behind him, wearing oversized sunglasses that failed to hide the bruise along her cheekbone. Madison Drew, trembling from head to toe, clutched her arms around herself as she shuffled inside. The entire courtroom erupted in whispers. Dozens of spectators leaned forward to catch every detail of the defendants' battered appearances. It was the first time the public had seen them since the attempted escape. To many, the sight symbolized the collapse of a family that believed itself untouchable. When the judge entered and called the session to order, the room fell silent. The prosecutor stood and began reading the charges. His voice was steady and precise. Count 1. Assault on a pregnant woman resulting in bodily harm. Count 2. Endangerment of an unborn child. Count 3. Attempted destruction of evidence. Count 4. Flight to evade prosecution. Each word struck the defendants like a blow. Madison began to cry softly, while Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, overwhelmed. Sandra Miles rose calmly from her seat. Without a word, she connected her laptop to the courtroom's large screen. A moment later, the original hospital camera footage appeared. The room darkened slightly as the lights dimmed. The recording played from the beginning. The hallway. Julia holding her belly. The verbal confrontation. Then the unmistakable scene played in slow motion. Isabella lunged forward. Her foot struck Julia. Julia fell. Madison laughed. A faint gasp spread through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. Reporters scribbled frantically. Sandra paused the video at the exact frame, showing Madison's smile. "This," she said, "is not an accident. This is cruelty. This is intent." Ethan's color drained. His breathing quickened. He could not take his eyes off the screen. Isabella gripped the table so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Madison covered her face with trembling hands. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. The prosecutor then called the first witness. A middle-aged patient stepped into the witness box. He spoke clearly and firmly. "I saw the kick," he said. "There was no slip, no stumble, no misunderstanding. That woman kicked her on purpose." His testimony hit the defendants like another blow. Julia watched him with gratitude in her eyes. Next, 2 agents from the FBI testified about the attempted deletion of evidence. One displayed a digital forensic report on the screen. The defendant Ethan Ward accessed the server at approximately 2:28 in the afternoon. He attempted to delete the video file. The action was recorded and intercepted. It was an intentional effort to destroy evidence. Gasps spread across the room again. Ethan's jaw clenched with panic. He shot Madison an accusatory glare, but she avoided his eyes, trembling harder. Suddenly, Isabella stood up and shouted, "This is all a misunderstanding. I never meant to hurt her. She provoked us. You do not understand our family." Her voice cracked with desperation. The judge banged the gavel sharply. "Sit down, Miss Ward. You will wait your turn to speak." Laughter rippled across the spectator section, mocking her attempt to escape responsibility. Madison broke next. Under pressure from the prosecutor, she burst into tears. "Please, I want to make a deal. I will tell everything. I cannot go to prison for something I did not plan alone." Her voice echoed across the courtroom, exposing her fear. She turned toward Ethan and Isabella, her face crumpled. "They made me do it. They told me to stay quiet." Ethan's face twisted with rage. He yanked against his restraints and shouted, "You traitor!" Officers quickly restrained him as the judge scolded him for his outburst. Sandra then requested that the court review the financial documents and internal emails collected earlier. The screen displayed the damning message written by Ethan. "Julia will not be a problem anymore." Julia felt her throat tighten. The words hit her like a cold wave. Robert placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Sandra spoke with a firm, unwavering voice. This was not impulsive. This was organized. This was coordinated cruelty intended to silence a pregnant woman. The prosecutor then stepped forward to deliver his recommendation. He addressed the judge solemnly. Given the premeditated nature of the assault, the danger to both mother and unborn child, the attempted destruction of evidence, and the effort to flee the country, the state requests the maximum sentence allowed. Julia looked at Ethan. For the first time, he appeared truly defeated. He slumped in his seat, realizing that there was no escape left, no influence to hide behind, no lie strong enough to pull him out of the truth. Spectators murmured. Many wiped tears from their eyes as they glanced at Julia, admiring her strength. Reporters typed frantically, preparing headlines for the evening broadcasts. The judge lifted his gavel. "This session is suspended. The final verdict will be delivered in the next hearing." He struck the gavel firmly. The sound echoed like the heartbeat of justice. The day of sentencing began with a cold wind sweeping across the steps of the Boston Superior Court. Reporters lined up before sunrise, adjusting their microphones while camera crews set up lights along the courthouse walkway. The entire country had followed the trial, and now the final chapter was about to unfold. Inside the building, officers checked every bag and badge with heightened vigilance. The hallways buzzed with tension and anticipation. Julia Parker stepped out of the elevator with her hands placed gently over her belly. She wore a dark blue maternity dress that rested softly around her figure, giving her a calm and dignified presence. Her breathing was steady as she walked toward the courtroom doors. Robert Ward walked beside her like a protective wall, while Sandra Miles held the case files close to her chest. Everyone who saw Julia felt a quiet respect. She had survived the darkest storm and now stood ready to witness justice. Across the hall, the defendants were brought in through the back entrance. Ethan Ward moved slowly, his wrists cuffed, his face pale from exhaustion and the fights he endured in jail. The purple bruise along his jaw was still visible. He looked down at his shoes, unwilling to meet the eyes of anyone around him. Behind him, Isabella Ward shuffled forward with her hair pulled back harshly, revealing the marks left on her face from the altercation in the holding cell. She tried to maintain her pride, but fear flickered across her expression. Madison Drew followed last, her steps unsteady. She clutched her arms tightly, trembling as the officers guided her inside. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. The spectators rose as the judge entered. His presence commanded immediate silence. He sat, adjusted his glasses, and reviewed the documents laid before him. The air grew still, heavy with expectation. The prosecutor delivered the final remarks. He stood tall and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, this case is not a misunderstanding. It is not a family disagreement. This is a deliberate attack on a pregnant woman and a coordinated attempt to conceal the truth. The victim endured physical harm, emotional trauma, and a threat to her unborn child. We ask that the court deliver a sentence that reflects the seriousness of these crimes." Sandra rose next. She walked to the center of the courtroom and spoke clearly. Julia Parker is not here to seek revenge. She is here to seek safety. She is here to reclaim her future. The injuries to her body and to her peace of mind will stay with her for years. The actions of the defendants were calculated. They put both Julia and her unborn child at risk. Today is a chance to ensure that no one else suffers at their hands. The judge nodded thoughtfully and turned his gaze to Ethan. The room fell silent. "Ethan Ward," he said, "you stand accused of aiding and concealing acts of violence, attempting to destroy evidence, and facilitating a plan that endangered a pregnant woman. For these crimes, the court sentences you to 10 years in state prison." A wave of murmurs swept across the room. Ethan closed his eyes and lowered his head. His shoulders shook slightly as the consequences of his actions settled into place. The judge then addressed Isabella. "Isabella Ward, the evidence clearly shows that you delivered the assault that endangered both mother and child. Your actions were intentional and malicious. Therefore, the court sentences you to 20 years in state prison without the possibility of parole." Isabella gasped, her breath hitching as panic washed over her. Officers stepped closer as she clutched the front of her prison uniform, unable to comprehend the length of her sentence. Next, the judge looked at Madison. "Madison Drew, although you cooperated with investigators, your involvement in the attack is undeniable. You contributed to the harm inflicted on the victim. You are sentenced to 20 years in state prison without parole." Madison broke into sobs, covering her face with her hands. Her cries echoed through the quiet room. The officers moved in to escort all 3 defendants back toward the holding area. A quiet ripple of relief spread through the audience. Some spectators clapped softly in support of Julia. Others wiped tears as they watched her stand with quiet strength. She pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed not by vengeance, but by the weight of closure. Robert wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders. "Justice has prevailed," he whispered. Julia's eyes glistened as she nodded. She felt the tension she had carried for months slowly begin to melt away. The press outside exploded with headlines as soon as the sentences were announced. Reporters rushed to deliver live broadcasts. "A landmark ruling," one journalist declared. "The pregnant mother who fought back has won." Cameras followed Julia as she exited the courthouse, surrounded by Sandra and Robert. Dozens of people called out supportive messages. Julia smiled softly but kept walking, her mind focused on the child growing safely inside her. Later that afternoon, Julia returned to the hospital for a scheduled prenatal checkup. The doctor reviewed the ultrasound and smiled warmly. "The baby's heartbeat is strong," he said. "Everything looks stable." Julia exhaled a deep breath she had held for far too long. Relief washed over her. A week later, Julia moved into the Ward family farm permanently, settling into a small guest house with a warm fireplace and wide windows that opened toward fields of golden grass. The peaceful environment helped her regain energy. She spent quiet mornings sitting on the porch, listening to birds and feeling the baby's gentle movements. At night, she began writing in a journal for her unborn child. "You gave me courage," she wrote. "You helped me stand up when the world tried to break me. I promise you a life filled with safety, love, and truth." The final scene of her journey unfolded one calm evening. Julia sat on the front porch, wrapped in a soft shawl. The sky glowed orange and pink as the sun dipped behind the hills. She placed both hands over her belly and closed her eyes. A tender smile formed on her lips. "A new life is waiting for us," she whispered, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt warm.